Welcome to Office Space, the new creative tech office market in Brooklyn. This is just Carl gave us a perfect segue, I think, at the end of his remarks. Over the last few years, a new market had emerged. A new class of young, innovative, entrepreneurial businesses had started and wanted to grow in Brooklyn. More recently, more established firms have set base in Brooklyn to be closer to the new creative and entrepreneurial talent that is not only want to live and play in Brooklyn, but now only wants to work. Last year, several of the largest real estate transactions in Brooklyn were office repositioning deals, including the Jamestown purchase of 49% of Industry City and the Watchtower portfolio trade of over 1.1 million square feet in Dumbo. With me this morning are the most active players in this new marketplace. To my right, Andrew Kimball from Industry City, Toby Moskovich from Heritage, Asher Abitsera from LiveWork, Miguel McKelvey from WeWork, and last but not least, Tucker Reed from the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership. Thank you. So maybe just to kind of kick it off, we only have 45 minutes, and I apologize for this panel instead of an hour because we ran a little late on the keynote this morning. Maybe each one of you can give us like a 60-second spiel about sort of your most exciting Brooklyn project, or what are you up to? So Andrew, why don't you start because you're right next to me.
Okay, thank you very much. It's great to be here. Great to be on such a fun panel, and great to follow three tremendous speakers, all highlighting the explosive growth of creative sectors in Brooklyn. And this has really been going on for longer than the last few years. This has been going on for 15 years. The Brooklyn Navy Yard, when I got there 10 years ago, was essentially 95% full. And what we did was add more space, add more space, add more space. And we couldn't add it fast enough. And by the time I left, we had a waiting list of 150 businesses trying to get in there. So where I am now is Industry City, which is a massive 6 million square foot project on 30 acres, 16 buildings, stretching from 32nd to 41st Street, 3rd Avenue to the water in Sunset Park. It's a property that, like a lot of other Brooklyn waterfront industrial properties for 30 years, struggled. The relatively easy thing to do was fill it up with some storage, some warehouse distribution, and not invest in it. The previous ownership really started to get it about 8 years ago and started to cut up space. Then Storm Sandy hit. $50 million of damage, 20 million gallons of water in our basements, electrical systems damaged. And to their credit, they brought in a new set of investors and partners. And it's not just Jamestown, it's Angelo Gordon, it's Belvedere Capital. And collectively, previous owners plus new ownership group has decided to really make an aggressive play to move around what is a kind of a massive aircraft carrier that was going in the wrong direction for a long time and turn it in the right direction. And that's begun with about $100 million of investment. We have 18,000 windows that need to be replaced. We've replaced about 9. We're doing 3,000 a year. It's the largest window project in the United States. 144 elevators, 70 of which work, only 12 of which are automated. We're in the process of automating 12 of those a year. About a $15 million electrical rebuild. Why are we doing all this? Because when you create small spaces for innovators, for makers, for creative office, they will flock to Industry City, and they already are. Just in the 8 months since the partnership formed, we've done over 150 leases, about 50% of them new leases, added 1,000 jobs down there. We're still only at about 3,000 jobs, which is really anemic on 6 million square feet of space, but we think we can take that to 15,000 over the next 8 years or so with the right partnership with the community, with the city. We really think that tech triangle can be stretched into a new formation. It can move down south. It's also going to move north up to Domino Sugar, and it can move to other parts of Brooklyn as Carlo and the borough president really focused on. So it's exciting what's going on. I think there's tremendous opportunity to grow, and why don't I stop there?
Great, thanks, Andrew. Toby, you want to give us a little bit of introduction on your project in Williamsburg?
So Heritage got involved in Williamsburg and Brooklyn and Williamsburg in particular in the end of 2008 when some of the families that I did business with found themselves owning land in Williamsburg. And we've had a pretty laser-sharp focus on the neighborhood, watching the growth of Williamsburg initially as a residential developer in 2009, 2010, and 11 when there was really no one else in the market, and then moving into the Wythe Avenue corridor, where, until 2011, other than the bowl and the brewery, it was pretty quiet, and started to look at, what a neighborhood needed in order to build a healthy, dynamic, mixed-use environment. We're now building a hotel, and as my dear friend Chris Haven tells me, the first ground-up spec office building in Brooklyn since the Great Depression. As my lenders like to tell me, the only spec office building in the United States of America, because lots of inbound calls from our residential tenants asking us for space, if we had something to rent in a basement. And then I went ahead and bought a small piece of retail on North 6th Street, the American Apparel site, and found this cute little gaming company, on the second floor, and started to recognize that there was a tremendous demand just, in the neighborhood from local entrepreneurs and others, to be in Williamsburg. Subsequently, we've expanded. We're now developing some residential property in Long Island City and in Prospect Heights, and very focused on the same strategy, which is recognizing that Brooklyn in general is seeing a mini, we'll call it a tech or industrial revolution, a lot of it driven by the healthy growth of residential development, which grew from Brooklyn being cool, the restaurants. It is sort of a pretty linear process that we see, and we're looking to play an active part in that with our building in Williamsburg and then other commercial sites that we're working on elsewhere in Brooklyn.
Thanks, Toby. Asher, do you want to give us a little introduction?
Sure. Thank you for having me, first of all. I think Eric Adams gave a very good narrative for every institutional investor who doesn't understand Brooklyn. Just summarize that, and I think we're good to go for funding. So, when I left my job about a year ago at Two Trees, I thought, what do I want to do? And when I formed my company, I remember looking at my notes from my first boss. He told me, people buy with emotion and they justify with logic, and don't do that. He said, you sort of have to be scrupulous about the fundamentals of your underwriting. Use historical data to forecast what could be a healthy investment. So when I started my company, I said, we're going to buy with emotion and we're going to justify with logic. I think maybe I messed up my notes. And you sort of have to do that when you're playing in this marketplace. And I think the reason is there's a massive disconnect between who lives in Brooklyn and in these micro markets within Brooklyn, and what's available to them from an end user perspective, whether it's retail, street life, office, even better quality housing, et cetera. So there's a lot of fundamental points that you can look towards that illustrate why this is a good story, commercial creative office space for businesses in Brooklyn. And you could speak about the accessibility, you could speak about the train systems in Brooklyn, you could speak about the culture and the authenticity, but really it comes down, to the people who live here. A friend of mine from Google said, the way you win the war on talent is with space planning. And if you do a really good job creating an experience where people wouldn't want to leave because there's a lifestyle component at where they work, then you've sort of won that war. So I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing with the portfolio that we purchased from the Witnesses. We just launched our marketing program unofficially because it got to the press about a couple of days ago, and we've unveiled that we're calling this Dumbo Heights, the project. Historically it was known as the Watchtower portfolio. We think the name is very appropriate because really what it's doing is this project is connecting the waterfront in Dumbo to downtown Brooklyn. It's next door to Brooklyn Heights, and it's a conduit to connect all these very important and exciting places. But it sat there for so many years, and there was a shroud of mystery behind it. People almost avoided walking these streets. So the first thing we said is, okay, we need to demonstrate that this is something that's a game changer. The second thing we said, this is a campus. It's not just a collection of buildings that could be office buildings. Our theme is unrivaled connectivity. The reason is the buildings are interconnected via sky bridges, and literally the campus sits between the AC, the F train, and it's not far from Cadman Plaza, the 2-3. And the other element to that is we're pulling dark fiber into the buildings to really optimize, what it is the end user wants, which is they want to be able to program something without their system going down. So I think the theme is we're taking these buildings and we're giving the appropriate infrastructure from a base building perspective and an engineering perspective that gives these companies who have matured, who wouldn't ever think about leaving Brooklyn, the platform for them to enable to optimize their businesses and thrive. And then we're looking at the retail component repositioning of this project really as an amenity to the upstairs. So we're not thinking of, highest and best use via economic impact on the ground, but it's really, we want to create a program where we've got our yoga, our juicer, our spin, dog walking, whatever it is.
So speaking about maturing companies, I want to kind of shift to Miguel a little bit. There's different neighborhoods here and different potential tenants in different industries and different size of the stage of their cycle. So can you tell us a little bit about, sort of WeWork, maybe a little background about the WeWork story in Brooklyn and how you're now officially coming back into the Brooklyn market? I think it's an exciting story.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not familiar with the WeWork story, we have 17 locations, I think, nationwide now, but we got our start in Brooklyn in Dumbo with a company called Green Desk. And when we started that, it really came out of what we saw as a emerging need for workspace for people who did want to stay in Brooklyn, who were tired of making the commute. And because they were working for themselves, they had the opportunity and the option to sort of stop before they got to the city and to avoid the challenges of dealing with, Manhattan traffic and all of that. So we felt early on that there was a large group of people who were, excited about living and working in Brooklyn, and that was, what helped us form Green Desk. When we left Green Desk, we had some restrictions on timing in terms of when we could come back. I'm happy to say that that time is coming to an end, and so now we're working very actively to return to the city. Return to Brooklyn.
It is a city. It's okay.
It is a city as well. Andrew helped us with some things that we're thinking about at the Navy Yard. Asher obviously is doing some great stuff in Dumbo that we're interested in, and we're also looking at Williamsburg. But at the same time, we're a tenant. We're not a developer, and so we're in conversations with developers on projects all over Brooklyn, and it's something that we find that to be our probably our strongest audience in the world is Brooklyn, and we think it will never stop. We think the conversion of people from commuters who go to jobs that they hate every day is ending, and the time when people work for themselves and find their own path is emerging, and that's the trend. So that's what Brooklyn is all about, and it will remain that way.
Great, thanks, Miguel. Tucker, do you want to give a little bit of kind of an overview of the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership in the context of office space in downtown Brooklyn, and kind of where do you see that market as you hear the rest of the panelists? It's just it's kind of interesting to get your data points here.
Right. So I'm Tucker Reed. I'm from that now forgotten corner of Brooklyn known as downtown, where I guess Carlo doesn't want to live, and our borough president wants to take the growth all over the borough. But they make good points because in a lot of ways we're victims of our own success in the downtown Brooklyn office market. I don't know. Yeah. Okay. So, you look at just when I took over, or when I was lucky enough to get this job a couple years ago, our vacancy rate was creeping up to around 10%. And I think we made a concerted effort at the partnership at the time with a bunch of our landowners in the area. Like, how are we going to diversify our local office market? We've been heavily reliant on the FIRE industries and government for decades. And looking at the growth in the Navy Yard or in Dumbo, which really spurred the vision for the Brooklyn Tech Triangle, how do we encourage that growth to spread out into other parts of the borough? I think what you're hearing from everyone today is now that it's gone even larger than that, and in a lot of ways it had been incubating or growing in those areas long before that. But I mean, you just take a look at this chart, which I think is a good representation of the kind of current space crisis that we face. Our vacancy rate is now under 5%. That's better than commercial office districts like Midtown South or, the Silicon Alley area that everyone associates with the kind of growth of the tech and creative sectors. Our rents have started to creep up a little bit, but they're still not at a place that's rivaling desirable neighborhoods in Manhattan. So we still have a lot of competitive advantages. Our biggest problem is that we've basically essentially run out of space. And with the residential market being as hot as it's been for the last few years, and the number of highest and best use of any of these development sites is going to be residential. When you have rents at $60 or $70 per square foot on the residential side, and 30 or 40 or maybe pushing up to 50 now on the commercial side, there's still that big delta between the two. So anyone who's purchasing land in the greater downtown Brooklyn area, particularly given the land prices we've seen that have I'm just in shock at the numbers that we're seeing now. Now, these are asking prices, but in the last 18 months, gone from $75 a square foot for land to asking prices of north of 300, 350. That kind of growth trajectory is just, I mean, I haven't experienced it in my lifetime, not that I'm a seasoned veteran like some of our other experts up here today, but, and I think putting in the context of the potential growth for the borough, that we're just at the tip of the iceberg. So Carl Weisbrod spoke a lot today about opportunities to look at new zoning approaches to residential and commercial development. Hopefully, city planning is going to take a real hard look at that, and we've been working with them on that. But whether it's in the commercial office space, the retail space, the hospitality space, I think as a borough as a whole, we're still just really at the tip of the iceberg for potential growth.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about. So we have Sunset Park, Williamsburg. Just representation here. Sunset Park, Williamsburg, downtown Brooklyn, Dumbo, Gowanus, maybe Red Hook, I hear. Who are these tenants? And can you talk a little bit about how deep this market is in terms of tenancies? Because it doesn't matter if Toby is building the first ground up spec or, Andrew is renovating. I mean, it's all on spec. I mean, you do not, for the most part, when you're getting into these big infrastructure projects, you don't always have a tenant in hand. You may have a lead, but so everything is a very speculative market. The data supports the growth. Just between the people on this podium right now, we have about 9 million square feet. Obviously, Andrew, you have this. Yeah, it's a little skewed there on this side of the table. But can you tell us, Andrew? Maybe start from you. Who are these tenants, and what kind of exciting? Maybe you can kind of give us an overview about the tenancy in terms of size, but also maybe you can talk about some new leases that you signed and.
Sure. I mean, the heavy demand is for very small spaces, so 500 to 1,200 square feet of space. So we brought 50 new, what we're calling creative workshops online in January. They're all leased by today, done. So, our challenge is getting more and more product up there, out there on the market, taking these big spaces, cutting them up, putting in new windows, making sure the connectivity is there, making sure the elevator service is there, the loading docks. What's cool about what's happening, I mean, it is cool to make things again. And there are all these new technologies where you can do in 1,000 square feet what it used to take 10,000 or 100,000 square feet to do. You can prototype in a matter of hours when it used to take weeks. So with 3D printers, with molding machines, with CNC cutters that are much smaller, with computers. And the other thing that's interesting is that these creative types want to be around a mix of industry. So some of the space looks very much like office. You go in and it's designers working at computers. The next space is an office space for a fashion firm that might have just moved out from Manhattan. And a great example there is Malia Mills, that's in the garment industry. They needed space both for office and for design, for photography studios.
How big is that space?
That one's a little bit bigger. That's about 10,000 square feet of space. But then they want to be next to the artist, and they want to be next to the small tech company. So it's this range of makers, and they want to be in a community. And in addition to creating the space, what we're trying to do is create some common areas that work for these businesses to come together, because there's so much business-to-business activity that comes out of those interactions. We're trying on the ground floor to create an experience, particularly around food. So there's an enormous demand for commissary kitchen space in New York City right now. So companies like Little Bit Sweets that were at Chelsea Market expanding, They want a commissary kitchen. We said, okay, if you want a commissary kitchen on the ground floor of about 2,000 square feet of space, you have to do a retail window facing out. That's a Manhattan to Brooklyn experience. Colson is a local experience. On 9th Street, the mayor, I think, gets his coffee there. Fantastic pastries. They needed a commissary kitchen, so they're now serving 3 or 4 outlets. They're on the ground floor. We say if you're going to have the ground floor, you're going to have a retail window, so that those ground floors become the gathering spaces.
So is your strategy essentially to create the excitement and the critical mass through the massive inflow of small creative tenants and then try to create this environment that the big tenants would want to be part of?
I think that is a core strategy, and we are incubating businesses in the same way that we incubated them at the Navy Yard, and that's not by giving them a sub-market rent. It's by allowing them to start really, really small, and then when they need another 500,000 square feet, 10,000 square feet, they grow and they grow and they grow. They add employees and they become part of the community. We do have some bigger players. So Virginia Dare's been there 100 years. They've got 200 employees, and they manufacture food flavoring. MakerBot is there and growing. So we do have some big players, and some of those big tech companies, it's inevitable they will come down, and it's in part because they want to be in this cool mix of the smaller
But it
creative
sounds to
types.
me like it's a kind of a transformation and a pricing point sort of issue as well. I think when I talk to Tucker and the other people in downtown Brooklyn, it sounds like the biggest demand is for larger Class A. In Dumbo, Usher, is that the case? I mean, you're not really chopping it up into 1,500 square feet.
It's really driven by sort of what your business plan is, right? So the way we see the Dumbo Heights campus is a little bit different, but absolutely we agree you need that mix. People want to be around culture, and people want to grow and thrive together. And I think Andrew's 100% right in that you have to think about the space planning, programming for a tenant, and how do you plan around their growth needs, because it is something that will fluctuate over the course of a lease. So you have to be flexible in your overall programming. In Dumbo, I can't speak specifically to what leases we've done or what we're doing, but I can tell you in the very near future, you'll hear about some massive leases, probably the smallest one being about 100,000 feet and larger. What I can announce, though, is we are going to initiate a smaller space program where we'll dedicate about 100,000 feet exclusively to sort of 500 to 5,000 square foot tenancies. One, because there's no space available for them if they want to be in Dumbo. And 2, because we think it's important and those companies can grow and thrive within the campus ultimately.
What are the pricing points that do you think for the small space?
For the small space, I could tell you on the larger space, we're doing deals in the mid-50s. I could tell you on the smaller space, I'll probably ask Chris Havens a lot of questions about that, and when we get there, you'll know.
40s. Toby, what would your project in Williamsburg, without getting into too many details, can you tell us a little bit more about the way you see the tenancy?
So, we originally purchased the site assuming that we'd be catering to, local entrepreneurs and tech companies, the 500,000 to 5,000 square foot tenants. And obviously, as the cultural environment in Williamsburg started to accelerate, but 9 months ago, Amazon moved in next door to us. And what we're seeing now is that there are much larger tenants in the market. We've had numerous approaches about taking the whole building at a very good price. That's not in line with our vision for a multi-tenanted building. And, essentially our goal right now is to, be able to bring in some of those larger tenants that are in the key industries that are cropping up in Williamsburg, which is, content creation, media. Obviously, Vice got its start there. Amazon's here because of what's gone on in the vintage clothing industry, even though some people are very sad that, Beacon's Closets moved out. But it's, clearly the market is maturing, and the border between Manhattan and Brooklyn is dissipating here, as it is in Dumbo. And the proximity to 14th Street is also informing the tenants that are showing up, as much as those core industries, content creation, music, vintage clothing, and some food.
All right, so we have $55 a foot for large space in Dumbo. That's official now. What are you shooting for in North
Chris
Williamsburg?
would allow me to share is that, when I held the contract before I owned the site, I had an offer from a credit tenant, a media, a well-known media company, at over $50 a square foot with Manhattan-style loss factor. But that's not, we have a very specific vision for what we feel is needed in Williamsburg. We've been there for many years. We were part of the renaissance of the neighborhood, and we're sticking to our game plan in terms of the right mix of the larger corporate tenants and then leaving room as well for the smaller tenants and to cater to them through the life cycle. So allow them to come in when they need only, as Asher pointed out, 500 square feet, and then what happens next.
So Andrew, in Sunset Park, I know that's an inevitable kind of flow. What kind of pricing are you shooting for the medium-sized space?
So with confidence, I can say the rents are lower in Sunset Park. So bring your cool, creative startups down to us, and we'll help nurture them. Look, it depends on
Would
the
it be
product
cheaper
type.
than getting a space at WeWork?
We work charges on the square inch, I think. So it's a different model. Theirs is very, very successful, and it's exciting what they're doing across town. Look, I think for the small spaces, for the creative types, we're in the mid-20s to high 20s.
Do you find it more like a monthly pricing point when you're dealing with?
I think most of the tenants look at it they don't look at it by square foot. They look at what the nut is per month, and they figure it out from there.
So it's like a 3,000 to 5,000 a month.
Yeah, but it's it's moving. I mean, you look at what's happening in the Gowanus. I was just talking to Chris about this last week, and that's 20 blocks from us, and rents are exploding there. So it's moving in the right direction. We also want to have, though, a range of lower price points for manufacturers. And again, the definition of manufacturing, I think, has changed very much, and it was really exciting to hear Carl talk about that. I mean, the way I define it is we shouldn't even be calling it manufacturing anymore. We should be calling it the innovation economy, and that's that broad range of making a physical, a digital, or an engineered product. Some of those tenants are going to need a bigger footprint. They're going to be heavy employees, particularly employing people who need those jobs the most. So it's fantastic, and I applaud the mayor for this aggressive housing program. If you really want to attack the income gaps from the other side, you got to create jobs, and this is the sector where those are being created. So we have products that are much larger, that are heavier kinds of manufacturing, although they still very much look like tech, and we have those lower price points to meet those needs.
So just to close the loop, Miguel, in terms of the kind of demand and getting back into the Brooklyn market, what do you foresee in terms of pricing and how many people really need this now?
I mean, the way we see it is that, Manhattan and Brooklyn are similar in terms of how people make their decisions about where to take space, and that's really, motivating characteristics of the neighborhood and what happens when you leave work and the restaurants and the sort of amenities that are around. And so I think people are making the decision for the same reasons. Obviously someone who chooses Midtown has very specific reasons why they want to be there. I think the same thing applies to any of the Brooklyn neighborhoods. So I think the thing that we're trying to appeal is that individual decision maker who can say, I want ultimate convenience, I want like the coolest place to be. And I think that Brooklyn has like an authenticity that you don't get in a lot of other places, and it's essential that remains. So I think one of the things that I'm personally worried about when you look at the sort of development of Brooklyn is, will that really cool, authentic, organic growth?
No more brick, no more reclaimed wood, only glass and steel.
I think one of the greatest challenges is actually the retail storefronts and signage. For example, if you look at Dumbo, what it was like 10 years ago and what it developed into, I was really worried that as all the retail became, revitalized or changed over, that it would start to look like any other neighborhood in the city. And I think that's kind of, you think about Industry City right now, the ground floor is just totally, if not totally, but very vacant. It looks really exciting and there's so much potential there now, but it would suck if like 10 years from now we're all thinking, oh, that just looks like everywhere else. You know what I mean? So I think that's one of the crucial things as we look to go into neighborhoods is like, will these places still be like Brooklyn in 5-10 years from now? And they have to be. If they're not, we'll all be sitting here saying what happened.
Right. So Asher, talking about authenticity, there's not that much office space in the Gowanus, and you purchased a building on 3rd Street down the block from Whole Foods. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your vision for the Gowanus neighborhood and that specific building?
Sure. So I invested in a project. My partner Aaron Lemma runs it day to day, but I can tell you a little bit about it. We bought a building on 3rd Street, it's 3rd and Hoyt. It's 1 block from the F train, and it's really on the border of Carroll Gardens and Gowanus. So when we looked at this opportunity, we said, shit, this is really, one of the only industrial buildings with beautiful bones that connects Carroll Gardens and Park Slope. Like, what are we missing? And the light and air were phenomenal. So, we said we think people would want to work here. And simply because if you look at who lives in Park Slope, Carroll Gardens, Cobble Hill, these are people who predominantly own their homes. They're very successful. It's not a transient end user like you might find in some more hip neighborhoods. So in a nutshell, Aaron underwrote the deal at, I think, $35 a foot. He'll announce soon a lease that he did in the 40s. Again, a large tenant, the smaller tenant's 40,000 feet, the other tenant's 50,000 feet, and he'll be done with it and stabilize, in a year. But the really cool thing about it, again, is the authenticity. It's the brick and timber. I think that while there are certain economic factors that would want people to look at making a decision to want to be in Brooklyn, you couldn't pay certain businesses to leave Brooklyn. So just like you saw in the residential 8 years ago, whatever it was, when we had a big boom, I used to tell people don't come to Brooklyn to undercut Manhattan. People are here because they never would want to be anywhere else. And now that coupled with a mature product from a base building perspective, they'll pay up for it.
So let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned it a little bit before, but I want to talk to, maybe Tucker can start about the work that he's been doing in the partnership. But retail integration and activating retail, I know that Andrew has been thought about it a lot and has been putting some things in play. He mentioned it. Anyone wants to jump in and talk a little bit about the retail integration? What does he do as an amenity to the office?
Well, I would say I think all the districts are a little bit different, right? And that context matters a lot. So where in downtown Brooklyn, it's maybe appropriate to have a new Century 21 or a Target because all of Brooklynites enjoy shopping in those establishments from time to time, right? Whether they need household goods or other things at a price point that's affordable. At the same time, putting a big box like Home Depot in Dumbo probably doesn't make a lot of sense, right? So you have to look at the context of the neighborhood. And I think Asher described it well. I mean, I think all of us appreciate that the retail, I think, for a lot of folks, for whatever reason, is approached with the completely wrong mindset in terms of asset value for the entire either portfolio, if they're lucky enough to have more than one asset in a given area, or just specifically their building, particularly if it's of any scale with commercial opportunities. Right? That the retail rents may be the highest on a price per square foot basis, but making a wrong decision on the type of retailer that you put in there can either add zero value to the rest of the building or detract from value, I would argue. Now, that's not necessarily going to show up in the balance sheet, but that's going to show up in the types of tenants that are attracted to your assets. And so in that respect, I think context matters a lot, and Brooklyn authenticity matters a lot. And that really comes down to individual neighborhoods and understanding your clientele and whether or not you're a neighborhood, if your outward-facing retail presence is simply neighborhood-centric or more regionally centric, which is like what you would find the difference in even just in the greater downtown Brooklyn area, the retail in Dumbo versus the retail in downtown.
And I even heard last week that there's some relatively exciting new places to eat are going to be announced in Metrotech. So.
Yeah, so Forest City's been working hard to reposition those assets, and we see it's serving the lunchtime crowd. So you're not necessarily going to have a great sit down 3-star Daniel Boulud restaurant, but what you find, a new Chipotle opened last month, and there are literally lines around the block every day to eat at Chipotle. Who would think that? But the pent up market demand that hasn't been met for all the commercial office workers in the area. So things like that are exciting to us. The Hill Country Barbecue opening was exciting to us. Rocco's Tacos, which is a Mexican restaurant from South Florida that's coming to the old Morton space in the Marriott, which is probably much more market accessible than Morton's ever was for the types of folks that are enjoying time in downtown Brooklyn. So yeah, one of the larger gaps that we have and demands to still meet in the downtown Brooklyn area are related to hospitality, nightlife, restaurants, bars, coffee shops, So, yeah, if anyone has ideas about new ventures in that front, don't be shy about getting in touch with us about downtown Brooklyn.
And I would add also, we've actually designed our building around engaging with the local community and retail. So we're cutting out the entire core, and there's going to be a pass-through with small-scale retail for exactly this reason. We've designed our building out of, we've played with the dimensions, but it's going to look like an old warehouse building. We're looking at cogeneration and other, fully blinged out in terms of, technology and access, but trying to be authentic to the neighborhood with regard to materials. And then specifically on the retail, we've cut our retail in half and bringing in local entrepreneurs. We're in discussions with a group in the neighborhood about working with us on building out, effectively like Brooklyn-style food court in the core of the building, all trying to extend the traditional, Williamsburg feel into what we hope is going to be the start of a build-out of office, between the North 12th into Greenpoint corridor.
Usher?
Yeah, the one thing I want to say on the retail, some things are not necessarily retail, but they're amenities that fit in the campus. We noticed a lot of creative folks ride their bikes to work, and it's a problem because it's prohibitive to get them in the building. It makes a mess. So we said, we got to create a bike concept. So we're working right now with one of our prospective tenants, campus-wise, to have a sort of bike valet. You come off, you drop your bike, they'll clean the chains, they'll prep it for you, and you call them ahead of time, we'll be ready for you. That's a concept we're working with. We think it's substantive. On this sort of retail story, note, I think it's important to pay homage to the original OG, David Walentis, who sort of, this has been done before, and it's because you had a visionary who had the space to pull it off and had the time to pull it off. We have a thesis that we can look at and say, how can we maybe optimize what he's already done? But the framework is there, and it clearly works.
I'd just add to what I mentioned before. I mean, the food explosion, the demand for sort of the farm-to-table experience where you can see what's getting made before you buy it. That's core to our whole retail strategy. We'll probably only have about 12% of our 6 million square feet retail, but most of it will be maker retail, and it will build on the demand for other locally made, locally sourced, sustainable, manufactured in the U.S. kinds of businesses. And they tend to be very, very small, but the demand for that kind of product in the country, but particularly in Brooklyn, is exploding. And so whether it's the furniture maker or the basket maker or the glass blower, that's the kind of community we want to create.
Okay, great. So we have a few more minutes, and then we're going to open up for some questions. But let's talk a little bit about land use and your vision for land use, just to tie it in context to what we heard from Carl. I was very happy to hear what he was talking about, but let's just talk a little bit. I know that from my perspective, when we look back at the downtown Brooklyn rezoning, theoretically you could build in downtown Brooklyn both office, hotel, and resi, but the economics in the last few years have been such that it didn't make sense to build nothing but residential and some hotel, and residential is the most easily financeable, easy to rent, easy to cash out, and so how do you what would be some of your sort of core bullet points for the vision of rezoning, the next rezonings, the next neighborhoods that would be rezoned? How do we make sort of office space or the kind of office space that we think we need part of this? Tucker, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, so you're talking about a market intervention because the market is not producing it on its own yet, or maybe we're starting to see it, and all of this is going to be moot in 18 months with Asher's success and Toby's success, and
Yeah, but
all of a sudden
even
we're
what
going to see the
they're
first new
creating,
spec office
yeah, but
building,
if
right?
they're creating it within the context of an M12 zoning, which is
Right.
something
I don't
that's
think
archaic.
Toby's doing that. I think she's doing something much more special.
Right. But I would, just to finish the thought is so it may just take care of itself if we continue to ignore this space crisis. The market will eventually respond because prices will rise. But if government wants to be proactive on that front, right, there's a whole bunch of things that government can do to help intervene either through density or incentives, right? Whether it's offering incentive bonuses for the inclusion of commercial space in residential buildings, right, which we haven't really explored as a city, which becomes difficult with two cores and all the other things that make commercial and residential combined a little bit problematic. But at the same time, the demand is there for it, and particularly that whole live-work philosophy. Many Brooklynites may be open now to working and living in the same building. And then I would just say, you know, from a public policy standpoint, we know as a city how to make affordable space. We devote it to housing, right? Those are affordable housing programs that are either underpinned by federal government, federal subsidies or other programs through tax incentives and things. We haven't explored, you know, affordable space creation for commercial, which we may need in the interim to help bridge that gap. So the tools are there. Applying a new lens to them and looking at through the new paradigm of the types of communities we're seeing developed in the outer boroughs in particular these days. And I think it's very encouraging to hear Carl talk about it the way he does and the mayor talk about it the way he does. And I think these are conversations that are going to be had in the next couple of years.
Great. Andrew, do you want to talk a little bit about land use?
Yeah, I mean, look, the days of the smokestack are gone. Manufacturing is very different. You can have residential pushed up right next to it in certain instances. I also think, though, that it is important that you preserve some areas that are just for the innovation economy and commercial industrial development. Some of those publicly owned, and we know what they are, BAT, Navy Yard, others. Some more private space. I think down in Sunset Park there's a general recognition from the community that the elevated BQE is essentially a dividing line. Now that said, you can have a much more aggressive affordable housing plan just upland and create the opportunity for the workforce to live there and walk to work at Industry City.
Or you can create the density in Sunset Park that's going to rise so much above the highway that it wouldn't matter.
Maybe build a bridge.
Exactly.
Right.
Toby, the way...
Yeah, I think the biggest issue is, as Andrew pointed out and Carl touched on it, you have these IBZ zones. It's really nice to speak about growth of affordable housing, but we need jobs. And I think the biggest risk right now is that the first I've ever heard anyone from the city even mention commercial was today. There's only been focus on housing and affordable housing and middle-income housing, and the need to protect the IBZ zones. I bought my hotel site from an 85-year-old former scrap metal dealer. It was over. If I wouldn't have bought it, someone else would have bought it. Their scrap metal yards are leaving Greenpoint and Williamsburg. Either we're going to put forth a policy that protects these areas and keeps residential out, and that's speaking as a residential developer, for the good of the neighborhood and the good of the city. So I think that this danger of an obsessive focus on affordable housing without recognizing that there are industrial areas that need to be protected. And it is very difficult to finance traditional development. There are ridiculous parking requirements right now. It's one parking spot for every 300 feet in an industrial area. That doesn't make sense. It was something written in the code many years ago for some esoteric purpose that no longer suits. So these are all elements that discourage development in the M1, M2 zones. And I don't think the city intends for all of that to be hotel. The goal right now, I think, is to make sure, and I hope that the administration recognizes that you need to both protect these areas from residential development and put in place policies in those IBZ zones and in the broader industrial areas that encourage developers like myself, Andrew, and then Usher's doing some amazing work, and clearly the pioneering efforts that took place in Dumbo to make sure that this continues to be a city where you can live, work, and play. The play part has been taken care of by many other people already. But, you need to be able to live and work for the city, for the borough to be vibrant.
Thank you. So unfortunately, we have to cut it a little short just because we're running a little late. We're going to take one or two questions, please.
Dale Damaris from Aegis Energy. I'm just curious if any of you, and I heard cogeneration mentioned, are there any other energy-efficient technologies you're considering in the work that you're doing?
So sustainability is going to become a core value of every renovation that we do at Industry City, from putting in energy-efficient windows to doing rooftop farms to trying to harness wind in new and creative ways. So that's sort of core to us, and it's not only the smart thing in terms of cost saving, it's not only the right thing, but it's what today's tenants want to see. And so we're just at the start, but we're going to have a very comprehensive sustainability master plan.
We're doing the same. We're working with Gensler and then Doug Mass at Cosentini. Part of the issue is that in these buildings, there isn't a traditional 9 to 5 or 9 to 6. And in order to maximize, you have to have creative and flexible energy solutions to allow tenants to work whenever it strikes their fancy, whether it's from 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. or otherwise.
But for Industry City, where would you see people living? Do you have any sense of it, that would coming to work there, and what kind of transportation would they be using to get there?
Well, there's a very vibrant, diverse residential community in Sunset Park. So once you're on the upland side of the elevated BQE, so 4th Avenue, 5th Avenue, 6th Avenue, 7th Avenue. If you've never been to Sunset Park, they call it Sunset Park for a reason. It's the most extraordinary sunsets that you will see in New York City. And I think that, there's a broad recognition in the community that there needs to be an aggressive, affordable plan put in there. And whether that means more density, I don't know. We are on the working waterfront side of the elevated BQE, so that is our focus on creating jobs. The transportation down there is fantastic, though. The NR&D goes straight to 36th Street. It takes less than 30 minutes from 14th Street on down if you get on one of those rail lines. So that's been a big difference from the Navy Yard, where mass transit's a lot more difficult. The Brooklyn Greenway is coming down eventually. We would love to see ferry service coming into the end of 39th Street. Wherever you've seen ferry service come in along that innovation corridor that Carlo was talking about before, from Bay Ridge all the way up to North Brooklyn, you've seen explosive job creation and value creation.
So it sounds like a pretty exuberant market right now. What are some of the concerns that keep you up at night? Or is everybody sleeping soundly?
Asher has two or three babies, so that's
Yeah, I
what's
was
been
on
keeping
the
him
sleep.
at
I'm
night.
not sleeping soundly because of the, it's not because of the projects. It's my kids. Thank God, which is the most fulfilling thing. I'm perpetually excited about every element of everything I work on, so I couldn't answer that question to give you something that satisfies you.
I'll add one answer, which I love Chipotle. I eat a lot of burritos.
This is a commercial, by the way.
But I also have to say that, I know that a lot of people would love them as a tenant in their building, but at the same time, it's like, if they're everywhere, and especially in Brooklyn, it's a problem. So we need to figure out ways to, I lived on Livingston Street, and in a previous life I put American Apparel into Court Street, and then I watched, I think, 4 yogurt shops open up in succession right down the street, as that was, and that kind of thing was sad to me to see. And I think that's the kind of stuff we need to be on the lookout for. And everyone loves Bedford, but no one's going to love it when it becomes Bleecker. So we got to figure out how to manage that transformation.
What I think is our biggest challenge, quite frankly, is subsurface infrastructure. And you look at where the economy's really taken off in Brooklyn, downtown, Dumbo, Navy Yard. There have been massive investments in water, sewer, electric, piers, roads, and the development follows. And, in Red Hook and Sunset Park, there's been a lot less of that, and there's a much higher vacancy rate. So I think what concerns me is, does the economy stay strong so that the city's coffers get filled and they can continue to make strategic capital investments in things beyond housing that will drive job creation?
And I would say, I think that it's critical that the administration recognize that, not everything that was done before was evil, and the city is booming, and there is clearly, there are people that were left behind and changes that have to be impacted. But the last thing I think anyone wants is to scare off capital investment in the city, whether it be in commercial development where it's literally just getting started, or in residential development. And the commercial development grew out of the residential. Somebody showed me a statistic, 60% of Google's employees live in the North Brooklyn corridor. There's a reason why these companies are coming here. It started with the restaurants and bars, then people want to live there, and then you have now the potential for Brooklyn to really continue to explode. And become a destination in terms of companies. So I think making sure that public policy continues to encourage that is critical.
With that, unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap. Thank you so much, Andrew, Toby, Usher, Miguel, Tucker.